Our speaker today is a Democratic candidate for Attorney General. We know him as, many of us call him Kwame because we're just friends of his, but Senator Raoul is a member of the Senate. He vacated that seat to run for Attorney General, but he took the seat from a once, we didn't take it, but he was appointed after then State Senator Barack Obama left to go do greater things. He earned his bachelor's degree from DePaul University and his law degree from Kent. Kwame is a true Chicagoan. I was waiting on his fiancée, Lisa, to arrive, but she was on call and is en route, he tells me. So we will acknowledge her when she gets here, but I want to decrease on the stage so that we can hear what he has to say. Those of you who are watching online, you will certainly hear some great nuggets from him today. Please get your cards and your questions up to us early. I'm going to decrease so we can bring up Senator Raoul.
Well, good morning. As Jay was doing the acknowledgments, I got an appreciation of, yeah, I'll take it. Of how many people in here already know me, or at least think they know me. You know, when I walked in the Capitol in Springfield as a state senator for the first time, it was my first time setting foot in the Capitol, period. I had never been there as a elementary school student, and that was something of great awe. And I was there to replace a man named Barack Obama. It was November 2004, and he'd been elected to the US Senate. And inevitably, someone would often tell me that I had big shoes to fill. And I developed a line that I use in every speech that year. I said, I love and respect Barack too much to have him walk around DC barefooted, so I allow him to keep his shoes, and I'd keep wearing the same shoes that brought me to the table in the first place. Yeah, you can clap for that. In other words, out of respect for him and out of respect for myself, I wanted people to know that I was not the next Barack Obama. I'm the first Kwame Raoul. And back then, just as I do now in this campaign for Attorney General, I want them and I want everybody to know who I am and why I'm here today. And I know many of you all think you know who Kwame Raoul is, but let's answer that question. Who am I? I'm the son of immigrants from Haiti, which you may remember Donald Trump referring to as one of those shithole countries. Let's be clear. The denigration of Haitian Americans in Haiti in general didn't start with Donald Trump. He was just more honest about it than most. I choose to recognize Haiti as the first black republic of the world, a country born out of a slave revolt, the home of hundreds of soldiers that came to this country in the 18th century during the sieges of Savannah to fight for the liberty of this country. Not a shithole by any means. The country of origin of Jean-Baptiste Pointe de Sable, the first settler, permanent settler in the city of Chicago. I learned from my parents' country of origin that all immigrants have something to offer this country, no matter how poor their country of origin is. I am the son of Marie-Thérèse Raoul, my mother, who came to this country from Port-au-Prince, Haiti. She initially came to New York in the 1950s as a college student. Eventually, she worked in the textile industry and in various odd jobs until meeting my father in New York. She is nearly 90 years old. She turns 90 next year. Yeah. I learned lessons of love from my mother. She was godmother to my cousin, who came out as gay when we were young boys. She taught me you don't pull your love based on one's sexual orientation. That is the foundation for my support for marriage equality and why, as Attorney General, I will protect LGBTQ rights. I am the son of Dr. Jean-Joseph Raoul, born in Port-au-Paix, Haiti, a city just hit by another earthquake, 5.9 Richter scale. He attended medical school in Haiti and moved to New York, where he finished his medical training in pathology at the top of his residency class. He came to Chicago in 1960 for an interview with Loretto Hospital. Unfortunately, they didn't see his education or talent. All they saw was the color of his skin. So he became a community physician on the south side of Chicago, serving predominantly African American poor neighborhoods for nearly 30 years. He was an old-fashioned house call doc, with the little black bag with the stethoscope in there, medicine in there, and he also carried a little black pistol in there. Because he would make house calls at all times of the night because he believed in delivering healthcare services to anybody who needed it at any time. He would often come home with a block of government cheese, a fruit cake, a meal that somebody had prepared because he refused to reject a patient because of their inability to pay. I'm the brother to Edwidge Raoul, my oldest sister, who followed my dad's footsteps into medicine and serves as a physician to the elderly in Florida with the same commitment of my father. I learned from my father and from my sister that healthcare shouldn't be treated as a privilege. That is the foundation of my support for access to healthcare, and why, as I will continue to fight alongside other attorney generals to protect coverage for pre-existing conditions. I'm also brother to Ninaj. And if you all wondered, Ninaj, that's my father's name backwards. But she carries his spirit as well. Ninaj gave up a career in fashion. She moved to New York in the midst of college and finished with a degree in fashion merchandising and started a career as a fashion stylist and fashion journalist. And she and my father went to Guantanamo Bay, served as interpreters during the Haitian refugee crisis. When she came back, she was so moved by the stories that she heard that she couldn't return to her career in fashion. She instead decided to start an agency based in Brooklyn that has been servicing undocumented immigrants for over 25 years. She taught me that children had been separated from parents well before widely reported a few months ago. I learned from her long ago about the contributions that undocumented immigrants make to this country, including paying taxes. My relationship to her allows me to quickly figure out that a statement blaming undocumented immigrants for Chicago's violence is not only wrong, but it's irresponsible. Most importantly in my family relationships, I am a father. I'm a father to 2 college-age kids. My son, Che, a 20-year-old philosophy major at Lake Forest College. I would never guess he would have majored in philosophy. When I think of Che, I think about when he was 13 in that basketball practice at Francis Xavier Ward down the street here. And there was gunfire outside of our Hyde Park home. His mother and sister were home, sister was 11 at the time. They hit the floor when hearing the gunfire. A 13-year-old boy was shot in the leg across the street. After coming home and learning about the incident, I called the family that was to give my son a ride home, and I begged of them to take him to their home, because there was yellow crime scene tape around my home, and I hadn't quite figured out how to tell my 13-year-old son that a 13-year-old boy was shot across the street from his home. It unfortunately was not his only such experience, because 2.5 years ago, he was home with his girlfriend. He's a senior in high school. He's home with his girlfriend, without my consent, of course. 18 shots were fired outside of our home. When his girlfriend's father came to pick her up, he had to walk her a couple of blocks away because, again, there was yellow tape marking off a crime scene in front of our home. When he returned, he asked the police officers to gain access to his home because he wanted to get back into the safety of his home. He asked a few times, and he was told the last time he asked, "If you ask again, I'm going to arrest you for obstruction of justice." When I subsequently had an opportunity, I had learned about the incident, and I had been in touch with the then commander, and my son called me, said he was at a restaurant on 53rd Street, and the commander called me back, so I connected them on three-way call. Commander said, "Son, where are you?" My son refused to answer. He had been rendered afraid of the police. I learned from my son's experiences that we have to deal with the trauma caused by normalized violence, and we do need to work on law enforcement reform so that Black boys are not treated as criminals, particularly when they're vicarious victims of the normalized violence in their neighborhoods. My son is a gamer. He's got this huge 55-inch TV in his dorm room. I always thought that he was safe when he was a kid, if he was on our living room sofa or in his room playing his video game. But I've also learned from him that whether on the computer or on the video game, he could be vulnerable to online predators posing as kids. That is why I'm anxious to work on the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force as the next Attorney General. Now, Mizan, my baby girl, friend of Alex's. They were recently hanging out in New York. I don't know what they were getting into, but with your daughter, Wheeler. I did the most difficult thing I ever had to do in my life a couple of months ago. I drove 6 hours to Columbia, Missouri with my 18-year-old daughter, and then I drove back without her. I drove back in the rain. It was raining outside of the car and inside of the car. I received a call from her a couple of weeks ago at about 2 a.m. Saturday night, or maybe Sunday morning, however you want to characterize it. She said, "Dad, can you stay on the phone with me? I'm on the way to a party." I said, "What are you doing going to a party at 2 a.m.? She replied that a friend had drank too much, and as did her boyfriend, and her friend needed help to get back to the dorm safely. I learned from that interaction with my daughter how important it is to stay vigilant about protection from sexual assault on campus, particularly at a time when Betsy DeVos is seeking to roll back such protections. What affects my children affects all of our children, and it is incumbent upon me as a policymaker to pay attention and to feel viscerally the worry that other parents are also feeling for their kids on a daily basis. Nizam sustained multiple concussions in high school, and I see folks from Lurie Children's Hospital. Lurie had approached me about legislation on concussion. Concurrently, my daughter suffered a concussion and underwent a 10-month recovery. I was experiencing the effects of concussions on my own children and struggling to communicate to their educators who didn't fully comprehend the nature of their injuries. My daughter's academic record suffered as a result of lack of accommodations. My daughter's experiences gave added meaning to my work. I'm a graduate of the University of Chicago Lab School, where Alex and both her parents went to, and my kids went to. It is there where I met my longtime friend Arnie Duncan. We played high school basketball together, and we actually met in 8th grade. Arnie and I connected over basketball. Basketball took us into all neighborhoods all across the city, allowed us to get to know as friends young men who had far less than we had. The experiences we had interacting with young men on concrete basketball courts across the city helps us both believe that we can save lives by way of bold intervention work. I applaud the work that Arnie has done with Chicago Cred. I'm a graduate of Chicago higher education institutions, DePaul University. I'm a Blue Demon. No, any Blue Demon out there? Come on, somebody. I know Loyola's done well lately, but I was a college student when Harold Washington was elected. I was impressed with his intellect, his communication skills, and the way he adapted his approach to the city's communities, building a coalition of progressive advocacy. In my first job out of college, I was a bill collector, and my passion for social justice got me fired. Mayor Washington had just passed away, and the question was, how would he be replaced? I missed work while demonstrating in front of City Hall for the city to continue following his progressive direction. My next job was as a quality auditor for a company called Persico that bought packaging for the McDonald's Corporation. I inspected napkins, cups, straws, and those little foam sandwich boxes. Whenever I went to a factory to visit, I was a client. I was the big deal. I remember going to Nahill, Alabama. This is in the 80s. They were surprised when they saw my face. They immediately looked at each other and said, we ought to get Curtis. I think we ought to get Curtis. Curtis was African American. He was a line supervisor. He wouldn't normally be in these meetings. I got to know the plant managers better over the next few days, and we shared openly stories and each other's different experiences. We were finally able to have some honest conversations about race. Even though their first impression had been one of fear and awkwardness, and my first impression was that they were racist. While traveling for that job, I had several similar experiences. Along with the fire that Harold Washington had kindled in me, and they drove me to want to go to law school. And I attended Chicago-Kent College of Law, where I graduated 25 years ago. My 25-year legal career has afforded me a wide variety of opportunities to be an advocate for the voiceless. I started out in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, first in criminal appeals, responding to the appeals of convicted violent criminals. Then in the Workers' Compensation Unit, defending claims brought against the county for injuries in the workplace. And then in juvenile court, where I handled child protection cases as well as juvenile delinquency prosecutions. In juvenile court, I learned that these cases could be two sides of the same coin. When we used to do a background check on a juvenile brought in on a delinquency case for having committed a crime, A high percentage of the time, they had been in the building earlier as a victim of abuse and neglect in their own homes. I learned that there are cycles of violence in certain communities. Only years later did I learn about trauma-informed care and begin to work toward the establishment of trauma recovery centers to treat victims and interrupt cycles of violence. But these seeds were planted in my mind, in my heart back then when I was serving in the state's attorney's office. After working as a prosecutor, I went into private practice in a small storefront practice, taking on many different cases representing indigent clients. I then worked for city colleges. I negotiated contracts with 13 different collective bargaining units. I litigated cases in both state and federal court. And I've since worked for two major law firms, Miller Canfield and now Quarles and Brady. But as while I was at city colleges, I was tapped to replace Barack Obama in the state Senate. When I first started in Springfield, Barack was there on my first day and to say goodbye to his colleagues. And I remember after the ceremonies, I said, "Hey, Barack, you know, I've never been in this building. I don't even know where the bathrooms are. Can you give me some advice?" He says, "Well, I've got a plane to catch. But I'm going to eat lunch in my office, and I could give you advice then." And I said, "That's cool, but, you know, isn't that my office now?" He did spend some time, and he did give me some valuable advice. He told me that, you know, legislators here from Chicago, you can spend all your time with the legislators from Chicago, or you could get to know people from other parts of the state and on the other side of the aisle. Find out your commonalities, find out about your differences, have discussions about them without being offended. Allow the full conversation to happen. That'll allow you to get more hard work done down here, and I followed his advice. It's allowed me to take on controversial legislative issues. You know, early in my tenure, lobbyists would come to me and say, "We know you'll support this bill because Barack supported it." And I would say, "Well, unfortunately, Barack is in DC and he took his gray matter with him." I've been able to work in the legislature on many of the middle-of-the-road issues where you get hit by traffic going both directions. I've run towards these issues: workers' comp, concealed carry, pension issues. There are no-win political issues, but somebody has to take leadership. I'm now to the point where I've thrown my hat in for the office of Attorney General. And Lisa Madigan introduced a speaker at the ABA conference this summer who said that, Sherilyn Eiffel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, she said, "We used to count on the US Attorney General to come in and defend the citizenry, oftentimes against the overreach of the state or local government, desegregation of schools, housing cases, law enforcement abuses. If you're counting on Jeff Sessions. Now the shoe's on the other foot is state attorneys general, collectively and individually fighting these fights to keep families together, to protect a woman's right to choose, to keep our air and our water clean, to stop discriminatory travel bans, and here in our city of Chicago to move towards the consent decree." It was Lisa Madigan who stepped up. So November 6th is the day for me. That determines, and Jackie, I haven't given up my seat yet. There you go. I hope to. And November 6th will be that determinative date. And November 6th has long been an important day for me. It was the day 14 years ago that I was appointed to replace Barack Obama. It was a day 15 years ago I lost my father to prostate cancer. The same disease that took his father and my mother's father. That was a warning for me. When I go into the physician's office, you answer that question about family history, I would say prostate cancer. And I had a health care card. And with that health care card, I screened year after year. 3 years ago, my day came, first business day of the year. Got the phone call, you've got cancer. I cried. But then I lifted my head up and I said, I've been screening dutifully. I've received the warning of my grandfathers and my fathers. I've got the benefit of health care coverage. And with that benefit, I'm probably the beneficiary of early detection, the very thing that the Affordable Care Act tries to get people to embrace preventative health care for. And with this health care card, I could shop Chicago and anywhere else to find a surgeon that has done the most robotic prostatectomies. And I found him at the University of Chicago. And he removed that cancer from my body that allows me to stand before you as a survivor, ready to fight for that access to health care for not only the citizens of Illinois, but citizens all across the country. This journey for me to the Attorney General's office is not just a journey to higher office. This is the office that I dreamed about as a first-year law student, to have an opportunity to be an advocate for people. And that's what I intend on doing. Well, not on November 6th, but on January 13th, when I hope to hold my hand up. Thank you, City Club.
I agree. We've got a few questions, but there are a couple of things I need to do. First, I neglected to acknowledge that we at City Club try to support and acknowledge other not-for-profits who are doing great things, and Misericordia happens to be one of the organizations that we also sister support. And the Heart of Mercy Ball is November 16th at the Hilton, and it just so happens that, you got a question? Okay. See, we flex like that here, it's fine. The Heart of Mercy Ball will be November 16th, and we've got a few people that we would like to let you guys know are going to be honored. Andy Glore from Sterling Bay. Ann Pramaggiore is getting the Pillar of Community Award from ComEd. And our own Jay and Colleen Doherty will be getting the Sister Rosemary Connolly Service Medallion. So, all very, very deserving, and we'd love for you to support them if at all possible. So that was also my filler time to let Kwame take a breath and get some water. I only have a few questions, and I think it's because if you know Senator Raoul and you see his passion, which I'm sure you do, he's always been a very, very thorough person, taking time and care to anything that he gets involved in. He doesn't just dip his toe in the water, he gets all the way in. And I can say that from having worked with him for many years, more than we probably want to say. But very, very good, accurate analysis of who Senator Raoul is. So check your registrations, and if you've been watching the news, just before you go, don't go for these surprises. Check your registration, make sure you're all set. Did you all get that? Okay, I thought some of you might have missed it. Let's go right into the questions. Bob Gallo from AARP was one of the first people here. We should give a prize for the first person here, I think. The Tribune's investigation of nursing home neglect and abuse uncovered a tragic death of a person and a serious suffering of others due to bed sores and sepsis. As AG, what will you do to safeguard nursing homes, et cetera?
Well, let me first say that, and I should have done this in the context of my speech, that Lisa Madigan has been a tremendous advocate for consumers and for the citizenry at large, and nothing is going to change in that regard. Being the son of a healthcare provider who also served in nursing homes. It's important for me to make sure that I use the advocacy of the Attorney General's office to keep standards up in all healthcare facilities, including nursing homes. I just lost my my aunt, who was a Vietnam vet, served as a nurse in Vietnam. She passed away most recently in a nursing home, and her service as a nurse and her service to this country will not be forgotten in my service as Attorney General.
The next question is from Joyce Allman. If elected, well, when elected, what is on your agenda to get done in the first 100 days in office?
Well, I think the first thing is to do, Lisa's been serving for 16 years, and the first thing that one has to do in any office is do an assessment of the office, and all across the board. That's fundamentally one of the challenges in the Attorney General's office is retention of good talent, because we don't pay the folks in the Attorney General's office what they ought to be paid for the work that they do. I, working with Lisa, created a public access counselor's office in the Attorney General's office, and they're really overburdened to the point where the claims are really delayed there. So I think focus on the entire office and actually the compensation levels for both attorneys and support staff within the Attorney General's office. I'm sorry.
We'll get you afterwards. Okay. Lisa just arrived, so we get to have her come on in. We were waiting for you. Mark Lovelace, where are you? I'm sorry, I can't read your question. Can you just briefly tell me what it says?
I just wanted to know what Senator Raoul's position was on the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court.
We were asked that in our last debate. I said if I were a U.S. Senator, I'd vote no. My opponent said she'd vote yes.
There you have it. Jim McVeigh from CAN TV. You're here somewhere, I know. There you are. The state's Cable and Video Act is scheduled to sunset in 2020. If elected, will you remain committed to protecting the interest of public access centers, such as CAN TV in the state of Illinois?
Sure, and I'll do so working along with my colleague over here, Art Turner.
I know. I'm like, you just did such a thorough job. No, that's it. Man,
Oh, great.
there are really no more questions? That is just go vote? You've got to make sure you're telling, check your registrations. Okay.
My name is Christy Sarah. What are your plans for criminal justice reform and mass incarceration?
Sure, and I like this question because I think. I'm sorry. What are the plans for criminal justice reform and mass incarceration? It's often said that a broken clock is right at least 2 times a day. I met with Bruce Rauner 7 days after he was elected, and we had a conversation, and I suggested to him that there was a lot of political cover given that Newt Gingrich, Ted Cruz, the Koch brothers, and others had openly advocated for criminal justice reform, for us here in the state of Illinois to tackle the problem that we had in terms of having maybe at the time nearly 49,000 inmates in in Department of Corrections designed to hold 32,000. And to his credit, one of the first things he did was sign an executive order creating the Criminal Justice and Sentencing Reform Commission, on which I served. And Roger Heaton, who was a former U.S. attorney for the Central District, I believe, served as a chair, and he did a great job. And Roger's actually his chief of staff now. He's a good man. We worked in a bipartisan way, and there's some recommendations that came out of that were put into law. in legislation that I carried, but it was only a small bite out of the overall recommendations. What the legislature has done historically is enhance penalties to where things that used to be misdemeanors have been made into felonies. Things that used to be lower level felonies are made into higher level felonies. We need to examine all of that. We need to examine truth in sentencing. We need to examine mandatory minimums, and you know, if we're either going to trust judges or we're not going to trust judges. So we have to examine that, because we have people who were incarcerated longer than they really need to. We send a lot of people back to prison on technical violations. The other thing is, I alluded to it in my speech, and I think this is a really important point. I just want to get this in. I sponsored legislation supporting trauma recovery centers, and I alluded to the work that my friend Arnie Duncan is doing. I went to a dinner yesterday that Chicago Cred was hosting. Moms Demand Action asked me years ago at an event in Evanston if there was one thing to do about, you would want us to focus on about with regards to gun violence, what would it be? And I know they were expecting me to say gun dealer licensing, background checks, banning bump stocks, or something like that, or tougher penalties. And I've worked on all of that stuff. But my answer was get to know the shooter. I said, get to know the shooter, because I've known nobody to come out of the womb with a gun in their hands and an attitude that they're going to want to kill their neighbor. Something happened in the course of their lives. And it's a common thing oftentimes. And then we start honing in on that, start honing on the fact that we have young men growing up in neighborhoods of normalized violence. They're victims. And we need to begin to look at them as victims. And those vicarious victims of that normalized violence, because they live in that condition day after day, can evolve into being perpetrators of that same violence if we do nothing about it, if we do nothing about the conditions of their neighborhoods. And so I am committed to that already as a state legislator, and will be committed to that as the state's next Attorney General.
I actually meant to mention that Senator Raoul has been working on so many of these things that he talked about today already in the state legislature with former Representative Marlo Colvin, Representative Turner, any other state house folk? Any other, who's here? Oh yeah, Kim was a state rep at some point. What's that lab thing? You guys all going to?
Lab power.
Oh, okay. I see.